Officer Angela Reed's police cruiser gently rolled to a stop in front of her modest two-story home on Maple Street. A soft breeze rustled through the branches of the old oak tree that stood proudly in her front yard, casting playful shadows on the ground. It was a serene scene, one Angela had always linked with safety and tranquility. Little did she know, the peace she had taken for granted would soon be shattered beyond recognition. As she stepped out of her vehicle, Angela inhaled deeply, savoring the crisp autumn air. It had been a long, taxing shift, filled with the usual blend of traffic stops, domestic disputes, and endless paperwork. Tonight, she looked forward to nothing more than a quiet evening with her family. Her husband, Michael, worked the night shift at the local hospital, while their 15-year-old daughter, Jasmine, was usually home by now. Her father, Harold, had been staying with them for the past few weeks. At 68, Harold was still spry and full of life, always ready with a joke or a helping hand. His presence had been a blessing, especially with Michael's demanding schedule. Harold had stepped in, picking Jasmine up from school and helping out around the house when Angela and Michael were both working. As Angela walked up the path to the front door, a sudden, inexplicable chill ran down her spine. Later, she would reflect on that moment, wondering if it had been a premonition, a warning from the universe that something terrible was about to happen. But at the time, she brushed it off, attributing it to the cool breeze and her own exhaustion. Reaching for her keys, Angela paused, noticing the door was slightly ajar. A frown creased her brow. It wasn't like Jasmine or Harold to be so careless. She pushed the door open, calling out, "Dad? Jasmine? I'm home." The silence that greeted her was unnerving, broken only by the faint sound of movement coming from upstairs. Instantly, Angela's police instincts kicked in. Her hand instinctively moved to rest on her holstered weapon. Something wasn't right. As she ascended the stairs, her heart rate quickened. The sounds were coming from Jasmine's room. Muffled voices, the creak of bed springs. Angela's mind raced, conjuring terrifying possibilities, each one more horrifying than the last. At the top of the stairs, she reached the landing. Her footsteps were nearly soundless on the carpeted floor. Jasmine's door was slightly ajar, and as Angela approached, she could make out two voices. One was unmistakably her daughter's, high-pitched and trembling. The other, to her shock and horror, was unmistakably her father's. "Sure, it's okay, sweetheart. This is our little secret, remember?" Angela's world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from her face, and her breath caught in her throat. She stood frozen for a moment, her fingers trembling as they reached for the door. As she pushed it open, the scene inside would be forever burned into her mind. Harold sat at the edge of Jasmine's bed, his hand resting on her thigh. Jasmine, her sweet, innocent daughter, was frozen in fear, her eyes wide with confusion. In that instant, Angela was no longer just a mother, a daughter, or a police officer. She became something primal, an unstoppable force driven by the overwhelming need to protect her child. Without thinking, her hand moved of its own accord, drawing her service weapon from its holster. "Get away from her," Angela's voice barely registered, sounding unrecognizable to her own ears. Harold turned toward her, his eyes wide with shock and fear. "I can explain," he began, but there were no words that could justify what she had seen, no explanation that could undo the betrayal she had just witnessed. The violation of trust, the unspeakable act, nothing could erase it. Angela's finger tightened on the trigger. The first shot rang out, shattering the oppressive silence of the suburban afternoon. Then another, and another. The gun bucked in her hand with each shot. One after another, 5 shots in total, each one a thunderous clap that reverberated through the walls of the room. The echoes of the final shot faded into the stillness, and Angela stood there, breathing heavily, her weapon lowered. Harold lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling beneath him, his life extinguished in a moment of utter rage and heartbreak. Jasmine, wide-eyed and trembling, huddled in the corner of her bed, her hands clamped tightly over her mouth as she tried to suppress the sobs that racked her small frame. The room, once filled with love and laughter, now stood as a silent witness to a nightmare that had destroyed everything Angela held dear. In that instant, Angela's mind went blank. The anger that had fueled her actions began to dissipate, leaving behind only an aching void. The realization of what she had done slowly crept in. She had acted on instinct, driven by the fierce, unwavering need to protect her daughter. But now, in the aftermath, she was left with the weight of her actions. The world she had known, the life she had carefully built, had crumbled in an instant. Angela had always believed that nothing could shatter the bond between her family. But in that one moment, the truth had become undeniable, and with it, the destruction of everything she had ever known. Tears streamed down Angela's face, her hands trembling as she holstered her weapon. The bitter scent of gunpowder thick in the air, mingling with the sharp, metallic tang of blood. Outside, a dog barked frantically, and in the distance, the wail of sirens grew louder. The world she had known had irrevocably changed, and there was no turning back. With shaking hands, Angela carefully tucked her gun away. Her focus shifted to her daughter, Jasmine, still frozen in shock. Angela moved quickly, gathering her in her arms, holding her tightly. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. "It's over now. You're safe." As she clutched her trembling child, Angela's mind raced. What now? How would she explain this to her superiors? To internal affairs? To Michael? But those were questions for later. Right now, there was only one thing that mattered. Jasmine. The sirens grew louder, signaling the approach of her colleagues. Angela knew that her time was running out. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself, preparing for whatever was to come. As the seconds ticked by, one thing became crystal clear. No matter the consequences, she would do it all again in a heartbeat, if it meant protecting her daughter. The story of Angela Reed, the officer who had shot her own father to save her child, was about to become national news. But for Angela, it was only the beginning of a long and painful journey toward healing and justice. The next few hours blurred together for Angela, a haze of questions and emotions that felt more like an out-of-body experience. The faces of her fellow officers, the expressions of shock and disbelief, the endless questions being fired in her direction. She answered them automatically, her police training taking over even as her world crumbled around her. "Yes, I discharged my weapon 5 times," she repeated, each word feeling like it was being torn from her throat. He was touching my daughter." Each statement left her raw, but despite the devastation, she clung to Jasmine. Her daughter had not let go of her since the moment it happened, her small body pressed tightly against Angela's, racked with silent sobs. It was Detective James Holloway who eventually managed to gently pull them apart, explaining that Jasmine needed to be seen by a doctor and interviewed by a specialist. Angela knew the protocol. She had been on the other side of this process countless times in her career, but knowing didn't make it any easier. "Mom, please don't leave me," Jasmine whimpered, her face pale and tear-streaked, as a kind-faced social worker gently tried to lead her away. Angela knelt down, cupping her daughter's face with both hands. "Listen to me, baby, I will never, ever leave you," she said, her voice trembling. "But right now, you need to go with Miss Taylor. She's going to take care of you while I talk to some people. I promise I'll be with you as soon as I can." As Jasmine was led away, Angela felt a part of herself go with her. It was as if the last sliver of her world had just walked out the door. Turning to face her colleagues, her friends, Angela saw the mixture of sympathy and uncertainty in their eyes. She knew what was coming next. "Officer Reed," Holloway said, his voice calm but firm, "I need you to surrender your weapon and badge." Angela nodded, her movements stiff and mechanical. She unclipped her holster and removed her badge, handing both over to him. As she did, a sense of vulnerability washed over her, an unfamiliar and overwhelming feeling. She had always been in control, the one people turned to in a crisis, but now she felt stripped bare, exposed. "You know the drill," Holloway continued. "We need to process the scene, and we'll need your full statement." Internal affairs will be involved, given the nature of the incident. Angela nodded again, her throat tight with emotion. She couldn't bring herself to speak. She allowed herself to be led downstairs, away from the bedroom that had become a crime scene, away from the body of her father, the man who had once been her hero, now the source of her deepest pain and anger. As Angela sat in her living room, surrounded by crime scene technicians and fellow officers, her mind wandered to Michael. He would be finishing his shift soon and would be coming home to a nightmare he could never have imagined. She needed to call him, to explain, but how could she possibly find the words? Before she could dwell on it any further, the front door swung open and Michael appeared in the doorway. He was still wearing his hospital scrubs, his face a mask of panic and confusion. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice strained. "I got a call. They said there was a shooting at our house." His eyes scanned the room, quickly taking in the officers, the evidence markers, and the tense atmosphere. "Where's Jasmine?" Angela, her legs unsteady, crossed the room to her husband. As soon as she was near him, she collapsed into his arms, finally allowing herself to breathe. But there were no words to explain. No words could ever explain what had happened. In Michael's arms, Angela finally broke down. She had been holding back the sobs, but now, with the weight of the moment crashing down on her, they came in a torrent. Her body trembled with grief, shaking uncontrollably. "It's okay," Michael murmured, his voice low as he stroked her hair. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Where's Jasmine? Is she okay?" Angela pulled back slightly, wiping her tear-streaked face. She's with a social worker. They took her to the hospital for an exam." Michael's face paled. "An exam? Sam, what happened?" Angela took a deep breath, steeling herself as best she could. "It's Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I caught him. He was touching Jasmine. I shot him, Michael. I killed my own father." The silence that followed felt like an eternity, thick and suffocating. Michael's arms tightened around her, and she could feel his own body shaking as he held her. "Oh my God!" His voice cracked with emotion. For a long moment, they stood there, clinging to each other, the world outside falling away into a chaotic blur. Then slowly, Michael pulled away, his hands on Angela's shoulders, steady and firm. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low, intense, and full of resolve. "You did what you had to do to protect our daughter. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." "Okay," Angela nodded, her strength drawn from her husband's unwavering support. As they turned to face the room full of investigators and fellow officers, she found a flicker of hope. Despite how dark things seemed now, she wasn't alone. Michael was with her, and together they would figure out how to navigate this nightmare. But as Detective Holloway approached, his face grim, Angela knew their journey was far from over. The investigation was just beginning, and with it would come judgment, scrutiny, and a fight for justice that would push them to their limits. Detective Holloway, to his credit, handled the investigation with professionalism and sensitivity. He brought in Detective Lisa Chow, a specialist in crimes against children, to lead the investigation into Jasmine's case. Together, they worked methodically, piecing together the chain of events that had led to that fateful afternoon. Angela's initial statement, given in the hours after the shooting, had been a blur, raw emotions, and fragmented memories. Now, sitting across from Detective Holloway in an interview room at the precinct, she struggled to provide a more coherent account of what had happened. "Take your time," Holloway said gently, his voice soft but steady. "I know this isn't easy, but we need to understand exactly what happened." Angela nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "I came home early from my shift. I wasn't feeling well, thought I might be coming down with something. When I got to the house, the front door was ajar. I called out, but no one answered. Then I heard noises coming from upstairs." She paused, swallowing hard against the lump in her throat. Holloway waited patiently, his pen poised over his notepad, ready to take notes. "I went up to investigate," Angela continued, her voice shaky. "The sounds are coming from Jasmine's room. I heard my father's voice. He was telling Jasmine to keep quiet, that it was their secret." Angela's voice broke at the memory, and she had to take a moment to compose herself before continuing. When I opened the door, I saw him sitting on her bed. His hand was on her thigh, and Jasmine looked terrified. Angela paused again, her mind racing with the horrifying scene she had witnessed. I lost it. I drew my weapon and told him to get away from her. He tried to say something, but I couldn't hear him over the roaring in my ears. I fired 5 times. Holloway nodded, jotting down notes. Did you give any verbal warnings before discharging your weapon? Angela frowned, trying to remember. I think I told him to get away from her, but it's all a blur. I just remember needing to protect Jasmine. I understand, Holloway said softly. Now, have you ever suspected anything like this before? Any signs that your father might have been abusing Jasmine? The question hit Angela like a punch to the gut. No, she whispered, shaking her head. God, no. If I had any idea, he's my father. I trusted him with my child. How could I have been so blind? Holloway reached across the table, placing a hand gently on hers. This isn't your fault, Angela. Predators like this are often very good at hiding their true nature, even from those closest to them. Angela sat there, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. The room around her seemed to fade into the background as the reality of what had happened continued to sink in. How could her father have done something so heinous? How could she have missed the signs? But no matter how much guilt and confusion she felt, one thing remained clear. She would have done anything to protect her daughter. And now, she had to face the consequences of a choice made out of love and desperation. The investigation was far from over, and Angela knew that the road ahead would be long and painful. But as she looked into Detective Holloway's eyes, she knew that, no matter how hard it got, she wasn't facing this alone. With Michael by her side and the support of the people who understood the weight of what she had done, Angela would find a way to make it through the storm. As the interview continued, Angela couldn't shake the growing sense of dread that settled deep in her chest. She knew the questions were coming, the ones that would determine whether she would face criminal charges for the shooting. Officer Reed, Holloway said, his tone becoming more formal. In your professional opinion, did you believe that your father posed an immediate threat to Jasmine's life or physical safety at the moment you discharged your weapon? Angela hesitated, the weight of the question pressing down on her. The truth was, Harold hadn't been armed. He wasn't actively hurting Jasmine when Angela walked in. But the damage he had done, the trust he had violated, did that not constitute violence in itself? I believed he posed a significant threat to her well-being, Angela said carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. The sexual abuse of a child is a violent act, even if it doesn't leave visible injuries. Holloway nodded, jotting down a note. And in that moment, did you believe that discharging your weapon was the only way to protect your daughter from further harm? Angela closed her eyes, the memory of that moment flooding back. Rage, fear, and a desperate need to protect her child. Yes, she whispered softly. In that moment, I couldn't see any other way to keep her safe. As the interview came to a close, Holloway sat back in his chair, his eyes studying Angela with a mix of sympathy and concern. You know, this is going to be a complicated case, he said quietly. Internal affairs will be all over it, and the DA's office will have to make a decision about whether to press charges. Angela nodded, feeling the numbness creeping into her limbs. I understand, she replied, her voice small. I don't regret what I did, James. I'd do it again to protect Jasmine, but I know there are consequences. Holloway leaned forward, his voice low but intense. You're a good cop, Angela, and a good mother. What happened was a tragedy, but you were acting to protect your child. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that's understood. As Angela left the interview room, a strange mix of relief and apprehension washed over her. The investigation was far from over, and she knew the hardest parts were still ahead. But for now, at least, she had told her story. It was out in the open, no longer a secret festering in the dark. She had faced it head-on, and now there was no turning back. Walking down the hallway, Angela caught sight of her reflection in a window. The woman staring back at her looked older, more worn than she remembered. But there was something else in her eyes, strength, determination. It was a new feeling, one she hadn't recognized before, but one that had emerged in the wake of this tragedy. Whatever came next, she would face it with courage for Jasmine, for herself, and for every child who had ever suffered in silence. As she stepped out into the afternoon sun, Angela took a deep breath. The world seemed different now, sharper, more dangerous, but she was still standing, still fighting. And as long as she had breath in her body, she would continue to fight for justice, for healing, and for a future where no child would ever have to endure what Jasmine had. The investigation was just beginning, but Angela Reed was ready for the battle ahead. As news of the shooting spread, it sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Millbrook. The story was sensational, a respected police officer gunning down her own father to protect her daughter from sexual abuse. It was the kind of tragedy no one wanted to believe could happen in their town, yet it had unfolded right in their midst. For Angela and her family, the aftermath was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions and challenges. While many in the community rallied around them, offering support and understanding, others were quick to judge. Whispers and sideways glances followed Angela wherever she went. Some questioned her use of lethal force, while others wondered how she could have been blind to her father's true nature for so long. The police department found itself caught in a difficult position. On one hand, Angela was one of their own, a decorated officer with an impeccable record. On the other, the use of deadly force against an unarmed civilian, regardless of the circumstances, required a thorough investigation and accountability. Captain Elena Santiago, Angela's direct superior, found herself caught between her loyalty to a fellow officer and a responsibility to ensure a fair and thorough investigation. She knew the gravity of the situation. There was no easy way forward. The entire department was under the microscope, and every decision would be scrutinized. As the investigation progressed, Angela knew that it would test everything she had, her patience, her strength, and her resolve. But one thing remained certain. No matter what happened, she would stand firm in her belief that she had acted to protect her daughter, and she would fight for the justice that Jasmine deserved. This was far from the end of the road for Angela Reed. It was just the beginning of a long, painful journey, a journey toward healing, accountability, and, most importantly, justice. A week after the tragic events, Captain Elena Santiago stood before a room full of reporters at a press conference, carefully choosing her words. She knew the scrutiny on the Millbrook Police Department was intense, and every phrase had to be measured. The Millbrook Police Department is committed to a full and impartial investigation into the events that transpired on the afternoon of October 15th, Santiago stated, her face an impassive mask of professionalism. Officer Reed has been placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome of this investigation, as is standard procedure in any officer-involved shooting. She paused for a moment, allowing the weight of her words to settle before continuing. Her expression softened slightly as she addressed the situation with more personal gravity. However, I want to make it clear that Officer Reed's actions were those of a mother protecting her child from harm. While we cannot comment on the specifics of an ongoing investigation, we ask the community to remember that behind the badge, our officers are human beings facing unimaginable challenges. The press conference did little to ease the public's thirst for answers. Local news outlets churned out constant updates, rehashing the known facts and speculating about what had led to such a tragic and horrifying turn of events. For Jasmine, the aftermath of the abuse and the shooting felt like a never-ending nightmare, one she couldn't seem to wake from. Nightmares haunted her sleep, and during the waking hours, she grappled with a complex swirl of emotions: relief, guilt, and confusion. The grandfather she had loved and trusted was gone, killed by her mother to protect her. The burden of these feelings was more than any 15-year-old should ever have to carry. Dr. Amelia Foster, a child psychologist specializing in trauma, worked closely with Jasmine in the weeks following the incident. In one particularly difficult session, Jasmine finally verbalized the overwhelming guilt she had been struggling with. "It's all my fault," she sobbed, curling up on Dr. Foster's couch, her small body trembling. "If I had told someone sooner, maybe Mom wouldn't have had to kill Grandpa." Maybe he could have gotten help or something. Dr. Foster leaned forward, her voice soft but steady. "Jasmine, listen to me," she said, placing a gentle hand on the girls. "None of this is your fault. Your grandfather made terrible, harmful choices, and those choices are his responsibility alone. You were a child who trusted and loved him, and he betrayed that trust. You have nothing to feel guilty about." Jasmine listened to Dr. Foster's words, but the guilt still gnawed at her. It would take time for her to process the trauma, but at least for that moment, Dr. Foster's reassurance helped to ease the burden just a little. As Jasmine worked through her trauma in therapy, Angela and Michael faced their own set of struggles. The strain on their marriage was evident. They both felt a sense of guilt for not having noticed the signs of abuse sooner. One late night, as they lay awake in bed, Michael finally gave voice to the fear that had been eating away at him. "Sam," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what if it wasn't just Jasmine? What if there were others?" Angela felt a chill run through her veins at the thought. She turned to face her husband, seeing the same pain and uncertainty in his eyes that she felt in her heart. "I don't know," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling. "But if there were, we'll find out. We'll make sure justice is served, not just for Jasmine, but for anyone else he might have hurt." The possibility that Harold's abuse might have extended beyond Jasmine added a new layer of complexity to the investigation. Detective Lisa Chow, working with the department's cold case unit, began the painstaking task of combing through Harold's past, looking for any signs of previous victims. As the investigation expanded, so did the media coverage. What had started as a local tragedy quickly gained national attention. The story touched on so many issues: police use of force, child sexual abuse, the trust placed in family members. That became a lightning rod for debate and discussion across the country. Angela found herself at the center of a media storm she never could have anticipated. Her phone rang constantly, with requests for interviews that she steadfastly refused. Reporters camped out on her lawn, hoping for a glimpse of the family at the heart of the sensational story. But through it all, Angela clung to one certainty: she had done what was necessary to protect her child. As painful and complicated as the aftermath was, she couldn't bring herself to regret her actions that day. One afternoon, as Angela sat on her front porch, ignoring the occasional flash of a camera from across the street, she was surprised by a visit from her partner, Officer Darnell Jackson. Darnell had been supportive from the very beginning, offering her strength when she felt she had none left to give. Angela briefly closed her eyes, a fleeting moment of reflection taking her back to that split-second decision. "Honestly, sir, no," she began softly, her voice barely above a whisper. In that moment, all I could think about was stopping him, making sure he could never hurt Jasmine or anyone else ever again. I know now there might have been other options, but at that instant, I truly believed I was doing the only thing I could to protect my daughter. The questions continued relentlessly for hours, each one delving deeper into Angela's relationship with her father, her police training, and her state of mind in the aftermath of the shooting. Detective Chow pressed her hard on the use of deadly force against an unarmed man, questioning why she had fired 5 times instead of just once or twice. Throughout it all, Angela maintained a composed demeanor, answering each question with as much honesty as she could muster. But when Chow brought up the other victims who had come forward, Angela felt a fresh wave of guilt and anger wash over her. Her voice wavered as she replied, "If I had known, if I had any idea what he was capable of, I would have stopped him long ago." The thought that he might have hurt other children haunted her, gnawing at her every day. As the questioning finally wound down, Angela felt drained but oddly relieved. She had told her story, laid bare the terrible choices she had faced, and now it was up to the grand jury to decide what would happen next. The weight of those decisions, both the ones she had made and those that still hung in the balance, felt heavier than ever. In the days following her testimony, time seemed to stretch on endlessly. Angela tried to immerse herself in caring for Jasmine, who was making slow but steady progress in therapy. The healing process was painstaking, but every small victory meant something. They spent hours together, working to rebuild the trust that had been shattered by Harold's betrayal. With each passing day, Angela clung to the hope that, little by little, they could find their way back to some semblance of normalcy. A week later, as the tension in their home reached a boiling point, Angela received the call she had been anxiously awaiting. She and Michael huddled together, their hearts pounding, as they listened closely to Grace Watkins, their attorney. The grand jury has made their decision. Grace's voice was steady, but Angela could hear the weight of the moment in her tone. They've decided not to indict Angela. There won't be criminal charges. The relief that flooded through Angela was so intense it nearly knocked her off balance. She felt her knees give out, but Michael was there, holding her tightly, steadying her as they both absorbed the news. "It's over," Angela whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's really over." But even as the words left her lips, Angela knew that it wasn't entirely true. While the legal battle was finally behind them, the emotional scars, those deep, invisible wounds left by her father's betrayal and the traumatic decisions she had been forced to make, would take much longer to heal. The nightmare had changed everything for Angela and her family. It wasn't just about surviving the aftermath anymore. It was about rebuilding the pieces of their shattered lives. The road ahead would be long, uncertain, and full of challenges, but Angela was ready. She had faced her darkest fears, and though the journey was far from over, she had taken the first steps toward healing, not just for herself, but for Jasmine as well. The weight of the past would always be there, a constant presence in their lives. But now, Angela knew they had a chance to reclaim some semblance of peace. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And for the first time in a long while, Angela allowed herself to believe that healing was possible. If this story left you questioning the darkest sides of human nature, don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more true crime stories that dive deep into shocking betrayals, tragedies, and the consequences of hidden secrets. Join us as we explore the twisted tales that reveal the true complexity of humanity. Subscribe now and stay tuned for new content.